Good afternoon and welcome to the Finance Committee for Thursday, April 18th, 2024. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 1:30 p.m. and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the traditional territories of the Shishal and Squamish Nations. Directors, we have an agenda in front of us today. Are there any changes to the agenda before we get started? If not, I would look for a motion to adopt. Thank you. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Moving right into Annex A, we have Corey Vanderhorst, Regional Assurance Partner of MNP LLP Auditors, regarding the presentation to the Board of Directors on the 2023 audit findings. So, Corey, I think we'll turn it over to you. Long time no see. Glad to have you.
Yes, great. Hello again. Bear with me here. I will get my screen all fired up for you guys. There we go. Hopefully you can see it and I can see you. Perfect. Okay, Regional District, thank you, and Finance Committee. Thank you again for inviting me here to present to you today. I do have some slides to go through, talk about some highlights of the financial statements, and a little bit about the audit process. Before I get started, again, a huge thank you to Tina and Brad and the team for going through the audit process. We really appreciate all the work and effort they put in to build the financial statements and to support the audit process. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about some highlights, really high level of your financial statements. Talk a little bit about the audit findings, audit report, and at the end, I'll confirm our independence, which we always have to do for every audit. So looking at your financial statements at a really high level for the Regional District 2023, you can see cash and investment balances are up to $74.5 million. Total financial assets of 87.4, so that's cash, investments, and any receivables that were in at the end of the year. The debt that the Regional District is your own debt, not just that of the member municipalities, is $24.6 million. And if you add in the payables and other and debt and the new asset retirement obligation liability, you get a total liability balance of $48 million. So the net financial assets for the financial assets minus the total liabilities there is $39.4 million, which has increased from the 25.2 in the prior year. Tangible capital assets being managed by the Regional Districts, water, sewer, infrastructure, buildings, equipment, vehicles, that type of thing, is recorded at $147 million. So there's some increases there. We'll see that on a future slide, what the cash spend was throughout the year. And the accumulated surplus at the end of the year on an accounting basis is $189.8 million. And we'll show you what's in that in a future slide. I mentioned that new asset retirement obligation number when I was talking about the liabilities. So this is a new accounting standard for 2023 that your finance and other departments put together the numbers of what would this be. This is related to primarily the landfill. If you see there, the big number is $12.3 million for landfill remediation. Last year, under the old accounting rules, that was on the books at an $8.8 million liability. So you can see there that the change in accounting standard created a $3.5–4 million increase in that liability balance. In addition, the project was look out through the Regional District, figure out all the assets that you're managing, what potential cleanup and remediation might there be. So the biggest one after the landfill is asbestos in some buildings and some septic tank remediation. And there's a calculated liability there of just over $438,000 for the asbestos cleanup. Most of these things, the asbestos and septic tank cleanup, it's a little more challenging to figure out when those costs will happen, especially if it's asbestos in buildings. So you have to get into a renovation plan. But the landfill would have timing attached to it for when its anticipated closure would be and post-closure costs. So in the future years, we expect this number to change. If there's any changes in regulations, you might have new liabilities coming on, changes in cost estimates. Similar to how landfill was always changing, always a number that was an estimate and was getting looked at every year. to revise it. We'll see that with these asset retirement obligations, and even changes in inflation, right, would impact on the costs and what the potential calculations are. So it's a big liability there at $12.7 million, and but new for 2023. Looking then at the statement of operations or the income statement, total revenue, tax requisitions, grant funding, other sources of revenue were $69.8 million, up from 58.8 in the prior year, but really close to that 70.2 that was budgeted for. Total expenses of 53.9, coming in under budget at 59.7, and as you'd expect with increasing costs that you see in the economy, the increase year over year from 48.9 to 53.9 million. On an accounting basis, an annual surplus of $15.9 million, which is above budget, as those expenses that were budgeted for didn't happen. So I say accounting basis because we put a lot of adjustments in there for deferrals and other things. To unwind all of those adjustments and accounting things that the accountants do to the numbers, I like to look at the cash flows and look at what actually happened in the main bank accounts that you're managing. So your regular operations had a net cash inflow of $17.4 million. There's just shy of $7 million spent on capital projects. So you can see that's about half the activity of 2022 from a dollar perspective. There's a net $860,000 transferred into investments to make sure you're earning a good rate of return, and our investment returns are very, very healthy in 2023. Financing repayments. So you've got a net cash inflow from new financing, whether it's equipment financing, short-term debt, or long-term debt, but it's a net cash inflow of $1.5 million. And at the end of the year, the main bank accounts had a net cash inflow of 11.2. The last slide for numbers in the financial statements is what's in that $189 million accumulated surplus balance. Most of it is the invested in the physical assets, the $133 million number. So that's not a cash balance. That's the value of the assets minus the associated debt. There's $50 million set aside in reserves. Capital fund has a surplus of $12.7 million. Current fund carries a deficit of 7.2. You can see an improvement year over year from the balance of 2022. And then you do have some MFA debt reserve fund cash. As your MFA debt gets wound down and paid out, assuming that no other communities default on that debt issue, you'll get that cash coming back to you. So that's what makes up the $189.8 million of accumulated surplus. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, talk about audit and audit findings. Happy to be providing an unqualified, clean audit opinion. We're satisfied that the financial statements are prepared in all material respects in accordance with public sector accounting standards. Ready to sign the report. The last step would be formal board approval next week. A reminder, when we're doing our audit, we are looking at your controls, make sure that they're designed and implemented appropriately. We're not necessarily testing the effectiveness of your internal controls. That would be a separate audit. We're then taking that understanding of controls, sampling transactions throughout the year to make sure that we're satisfied that they're that you're getting accurate financial information. And we don't look at every transaction. There's just a cause and benefit to, I'm going to look at enough information to make sure I'm satisfied with the financial statements. Again, a big thank you to your staff in finance and in other departments for going through the audit process with us again this year. And I'll wrap up with confirming that MMP is independent of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. Didn't do any other projects or work with the Regional District from January 1st, 2023 to April 18th, today, 2024, and also projected to continue to be independent to next week. We don't have any projects on the go at the moment or anything that we would be starting up in the next week. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Vanderhorst. Just get you to stop your screen share.
Yeah.
And directors, any questions for our delegation this afternoon? Director Stanford.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 31, where we had authorization and approvals and observation. I'm not sure if this is the place for staff to comment on ways that they're looking at addressing the outline under observation about certain policies, generally around employment policies. So I just a question to staff on that, or I can wait.
I think if I could get you to hold it just until we are done with Mr. Vanderhorst. So any questions for the auditor? Director Bax, I had seen your hand. Is it also for staff?
It's exactly the same
Okay,
question.
thank you. All right, I don't see any other hands up, so thank you, Mr. Vanderhorst. CFO Perot, did you want to provide a brief introduction to the staff component of it?
Yes, thank you. I'm just have a few slides as well to go over the financial statements, just more in a relevance to performance for the regional district. So I'm just going to share here. So essentially has been covered. There's 4 statements that inform the regional district's financial position. So our auditors have gone through those, so I won't go into more detail. Again, just understanding what accumulated surplus and annual operating surplus means, and essentially some of the key points for people to understand is they are not representative of cash resources. And our annual operating surplus, although is much higher than budgeted, that's because of the many carry forward projects and the sources of funding and debt payments. So it's not an actual realized annual operating surplus. So those are just some key factors for both public and readers to understand. And so we'd like to highlight that. So one of the other things that we do as part of the financial statements and included in our annual report is really some analysis related to our financial statements. And it's important to understand some of the revenue streams and sources of revenue we receive here at the regional district. So most of our revenue comes as tax requisitions and including parcel taxes. One of the key points here is to understand the significant increase in our investment income for 2023, and that's because interest rates were much higher than they were in prior years. And what that means positively for the regional district is that defers need to fund that through other sources, especially tax sources. And so those are for future capital investments. Another area is where did spending go for 2023? So most of the types of costs are going towards operating services. Our salaries and wages and benefits is the majority of our expenses. And again, we're seeing that our capital acquisitions for the Sunshine Coast Regional District are really going up. So we see a drop in actual capital expenditures for 2023 over 2022. But again, there's a very healthy spending, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So as you can see, significant spending, but we are definitely in 2023 saw about what we were spending in 2019. And again, that's a lot of the carry forward projects that we're doing. And in 2022, we saw a significant investment in capital. And most of that is happening in our water utilities and a little bit more in our recreation and culture. So again, that's reflected in our budgets. Investments in the future. So again, just understanding our amortization and how that reflects in the multipliers. So we're investing at approximately 1.37 times our amortization rate for capital investments. And so that's an indicator of healthy investment in our capital. And so the other areas in our investment in reserves are climbing. One of the things to highlight for the public and remind the board on is making concerted efforts towards our capital renewal plan. So many of these reserves are committed to future capital investment, especially in our protective services areas, our community recreation, and our water and sewer utilities. So some of our financial health indicators, long-term debt, we have a lot of commitments towards debt, but we haven't actually realized the execution of them. Again, one of the most recent issuance of long-term debt was for the Church Road project, and that was completed last year. So our long-term debt saw a decline, and we are slowly seeing an increase, and that's because of some of the capital investments the regional district's undertaking. So just some debt affordability, and again, our annual report, there's more details associated with this, and that annual report will be provided in June sometime. But essentially, we're seeing stable debt ratios for our debt servicing, and this is only for the regional district. This does not include investment or debt for our member municipalities. So statement of financial information is also included. We used to provide this information separately from the audit, and so we've streamlined that process, so that is going to be approved in this agenda as well. It's legislative required, and we must submit it to the inspector by June 30th, but of course, if it's completed and approved, we will issue it by the end of our audit findings, which will be next board meeting. So it includes schedule of guarantee, and of course, there's nil for 2023, schedule of remuneration and expenses. And again, this particular number of 75,000 has been there for well over 20 years, Brad? Yeah, so it really, I don't know if it's reflective of current wage rates, so that's why this report is quite long. And then there's a consolidated number for remuneration under 75,000. And then we have statement of severance agreements, payments of suppliers and goods, which is important to understand that we are in compliance then with our purchasing policies, and delegation bylaws is also a good indicator of that review, and the overall statement of financial information approval for the board today. Lastly, hitting on a question that's already arisen is our management letter. And so the issues identified in today's management letter have been highlighted in 2017 and 2022, and I'll pass it on to our CAO to comment on further action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, CFO Pro. Yes, some of these findings date back as far back as 2017. They were highlighted again in 2022. We have, upon reviewing and seeing that the comments are there again this year, we've decided to create an action plan and inventory of what are these specific policies that are out of alignment, what is the path forward to fixing them, and with the idea being that in 2025, we have different wording in the management letter. One of the things that's really going to help us with that this year is the approval of the additional policy assistance resource in legislative services. That'll go a long way to helping. And it's the other piece is just trying to free up the space to prioritize this work with everything else we have going on.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for stopping the screen share. Directors, any other questions? Director Inkster.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just when the management letter is spoken to by the CEO, and it generally indicates from the auditors, obviously some updates and or some changes and some, in some cases, some modernizations that need to occur within the organization. Is this letter a repeat or similar to previous years, i.e. you still need to do this? And the reason I ask is that the dates that they indicate in here is not just last year or the year before. It's a number of years ago that they've seen that there needs to be some changes and some modernizations. So is there, can you recall if they're mentioning these issues again? And then what's our plan, obviously?
I wouldn't be able to answer the question incredibly specifically,
Okay.
but I think generally,
Yeah.
the theme is that because of the age of some of our policies, bylaws, processes, et cetera, and the fact that they haven't been dealt with, while the exact reasons for those comments to appear in the management letter may differ slightly in the times that it's come up, the general theme remains the same. And that's what we're committed to putting some resourcing to this year to try to deal with.
Follow up, or are you good?
Yeah, and the theme, the general theme, just a reminder to me, because I'm not reading this as you're saying that, what was the general theme?
That there continues to be in the organization policies, processes, procedures, and bylaws that are out of alignment.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. All right. I don't see any other hands up for directors, so that must mean that everybody understands this thoroughly and completely, which is amazing. It's, I imagine, every finance officer and auditor's dream that their boards understand these things with perfect precision. Directors, I do have recommendations on page 103 of our agenda package. Would somebody like to?
So moved.
Thank you, Director White, and seconded by Director Gabias. Any discussion on the motion in front of us today? If not, I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Vanderhorst, for being here today.
Thank you.
And moving on to Annex C in our agenda package, status of reserves and holding funds as of March 31st, 2024. This is just to be received for information. Was there anything here that staff wanted to highlight?
No, staff are here for questions, Chair. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Directors, can I have a motion to receive the next two reports? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Directors, any questions on this one before we move on? It's a big list. I'll give everyone a second. All right. Then with that, I see no hands. We're going to move on to Annex D, which is the Canada Community Building Fund Community Works Fund update. And again, this has been received for information. Did staff want to speak to this one at all?
Just to comment that we haven't heard from UBCM related to the new agreement for community works funds. We had hoped as part of the federal budget that there would be some announcement, so still hopeful that that will occur. So we will report back as soon as we are aware of that. And as we are reporting for our 2023 requirements to UBCM, the updates related to the canceled projects has also been updated. So that's been reflected. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe at AVICC this last weekend, the UBCM president touched on this a little bit, that they're still actively working to negotiate and they expect the program to be carrying forward in some manner, but that's little comfort here as we're waiting for funds to do work in our communities. Any questions from directors? Director White?
Move to adjourn.
Well, I see no hands, I see no questions, and we have no other business, so I will take that motion. Do I have a seconder for it? I do have a seconder. Thank you. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.